Atlantikwall, the concrete giant of the Third Reich. October 1942. The vast and wild coast of Biscay occupied France. The Atlantic wind, relentless and salty, whips the dunes and cliffs. On the horizon, the mist blends with the sea. The only constant sound is the roar of crashing waves. But this ancestral sound is broken. It is the harsh, mechanical noise of concrete being poured. The sound of 10,000 men and machines embedding in the sand of Europe the foundation of a new wall, a defensive line that would stretch for 5,000 kilometers from the Arctic Circle to the Spanish border. The birth of the Atlantikwall. While Europe bled, Berlin's attention was fixed on the east, on Stalingrad and the heat of North Africa. In his headquarters, Adolf Hitler had given the order, Führerweisen, for the construction more as a political gesture to reassure the population of the Reich than as a viable strategic priority. The wall was, initially, a concept, a dotted line on a map. The security of Western Europe was, by definition, delegated to geography. General Feldmarschall Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, was still fighting in Egypt that autumn. At the time, the idea of a large-scale Allied invasion in France was to him a logistical chimera, a tactical bad joke while the Wehrmacht disintegrated in the Caucasus. Rommel's speech, skeptical and military voice. Excerpt from Personal Letter, 1942. This wall, if it is to be built with the resources they send us, will be little more than a psychological facade, an empty promise of cement. A handful of bunkers and barbed wire will not stop a mass Allied landing. True defense lies in mobility, not in stone. The High Command's perception was that the Royal Navy and the Luftwaffe would suffice. Concrete was merely a symbolic insurance, a fatal underestimation of their enemy's industrial scale. Ideology and resources. The project was not purely military. It was a manifestation of the Nazi ideology of lasting grandeur. Under the direction of the Toth Organization, the Atlantikwall was born as the largest military engineering work of the Axis. The workforce was drawn from the vast system of slave labor and prisoners of war, the Arbeitsheits. The material resources, however, were the first major failure.
Difficulties, criticism, and initial failures. Technical language. The project was born under severe technical and logistical difficulties. Scale versus resource. The amount of reinforced concrete and steel required was astronomical, diverting critical resources from U-boat construction and the fortification of the Eastern Front, which was the de facto priority. The human factor. Forced labor was slow, inefficient, and prone to sabotage. The quality of the cement and steel was inconsistent. Strategic criticism, 1942. Veteran Wehrmacht officers criticized the concept. One general, unidentified in initial reports, noted that the defense was too dispersed, diluted. A wall stretching 5,000 kilometers is, by definition, weak at every point, except for a few fixed axes. It is not a wall, it is a thin, discontinuous line of rigid resistance. The initial wall was a series of isolated bunkers and artillery batteries separated by vast stretches of undefended coastline. It was an Atlantic wall in name only. The Allied perception at the time was of a strategic bluff. The transformation of perception. Rommel arrives. Everything would change in November 1943 when Rommel, called back from Africa, was appointed to inspect and reform the defenses. The Desert Fox saw the facade and was horrified. He understood that the battle would not be fought after the landing, but on the water. From that moment, the Atlantikwall ceased to be a propaganda project and became a military obsession and a race against time. Rommel knew that Allied success would hinge on the tide and the first minutes of the assault. The wall had an epic name, but Rommel would give it a new mission: to transform it into a zone of annihilation. The fate of Europe would be decided in the collision between the Allied plaster and Himmler's concrete. Rommel's reform: the shock on the water. General Feldmarschall Erwin Rommel arrived at the Western Front in November 1943. His mission was not one of total command, but of inspection. He found a defense that confirmed his worst fears from 1942. The Atlantikwall was a military optical illusion. The system was based on large, heavy artillery batteries located on the cliff tops, strategically oriented inland, expecting the Allies to be stopped further inland. Rommel's insight: the Allied invasion had to be stopped on the beach. The reaction time was 0. The decisive battle would be fought on the first wet meters of the coast.
The new doctrine, coastal defense. Rommel immediately initiated a frantic fortification campaign. In just a few months, he transformed the defensive doctrine of the Western Front from war of maneuver to coastal defense. He ordered the installation of millions of tons of concrete and steel across the entire coast, concentrating on the most likely invasion area, Normandy and Pas-de-Calais. The anti-landing obstacles. Rommel's obsession led to the deployment of the densest network of anti-landing obstacles ever seen, designed to destroy flat-bottomed boats and infantry at the exact moment of landing, taking advantage of low tide. The obstacles included Rommel's asparagus, wooden stakes 3 to 5 meters long, driven into the sand and angled toward the sea, many topped with anti-tank mines or grenades. Their purpose was to rip open the hulls of landing craft. Czech hedgehog or element C, anti-tank obstacles made of steel and concrete, installed in the water to flip or destroy amphibious tanks. Hedgehogs, orikos, 3 steel beams welded at the center designed to catch on to the hulls of boats underwater. The goal was a 100-meter death zone, completely saturated with landmines. 6 million were requested by Rommel, though most never arrived. The construction machine. The giant bureaucracy behind the wall was the TOT organization, or OT. The OT was the Reich's main civil and military engineering agency, responsible for mobilizing materials and, above all, labor. The construction of the Atlantikwall depended almost entirely on forced labor. Workforce: hundreds of thousands of workers, prisoners of war, forced civilians from occupied countries, the Arbeitseinsatz, and to a lesser extent German workers, were subjected to brutal conditions to build the reinforced concrete bunkers. The command cell. The OT not only provided the workforce, but also oversaw the transport, the supply of cement, steel, and machinery. Its efficiency, however brutal, was solely responsible for the colossal scale of the project. The judgment of nature. General Field Marshal Rommel believed that the Allied invasion could only occur during a period of exceptionally good weather. On the night of June 5–6, 1944, the English Channel was rough with bad weather. Confident that no landing would occur, Rommel made a mistake that would cost him and the Reich the Western Front. He left Normandy. The fatal absence. Rommel traveled to Germany to celebrate his wife's birthday and attend a conference with Hitler. With the main field commander absent and the Panzer reserves paralyzed by the illusion of fortitude, the Atlantikwall was defended by static infantry units, largely composed of less experienced soldiers or those of other nationalities. The start of the invasion. June 6, 1944, 06:30. 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, USA, Gold, Juneau, UK/Canada, and Sword, UK, became the stage for the largest amphibious invasion in history.
Despite the Allied devastation from the pre-invasion naval and aerial bombardment, Rommel's reform on the beaches proved lethally effective. Utah Beach, relative American success. The American landing at Utah was a tactical success. Due to navigation errors, the first wave landed in a sector with weaker defenses and fewer obstacles. Casualties were comparatively low, fewer than 250 victims. Speed and tactical error gave the Allies a rapid beachhead. Omaha Beach, the massacre. Omaha was where Rommel's Atlantikwall worked as designed, combined with American bad luck. The tide. The landing occurred later than planned in some areas, fully exposing Rommel's asparagus and the mines. Intact artillery. The pre-invasion bombardment failed to neutralize the well-entrenched German infantry and the reinforced concrete bunkers, which were higher than expected. The chaos. American landing craft were ripped open by Rommel's obstacles, while assault soldiers were swept away by crossfire from MG-42 machine guns and casement artillery. Omaha became a carnage. About 2,400 Americans were killed, wounded, or missing, nearly half of the total Allied casualties on D-Day. British and Canadian beaches, Juno and Gold. At Juno, the Canadians faced a dense network of obstacles, suffering heavy initial casualties. At Gold, the British landing was more successful, thanks to the use of Hobart's funnies, specialized tanks designed to clear mines and obstacles. Despite the brutal German resistance at Omaha, the final tactical victory was Allied. The command paralysis caused by an absent Rommel, a cautious von Rundstedt, and a paranoid Hitler who refused to release the Panzer Reserve for hours, believing Pas-de-Calais was the main target, prevented any massive counterattack. The Atlantikwall, though built with the greatest engineering effort, failed in its final strategic purpose. It caused suffering, but it did not prevent the invasion. From that June 6th, the concrete giant of the Third Reich was outflanked, broken, and transformed into a graveyard. What remained was the slow, bloody Battle of Normandy.
The giant's fall, logistics, assassination attempt, and the legacy. The irrelevance of concrete. After D-Day, the Atlantikwall, as a continuous defensive line, became irrelevant. The bunkers and batteries that still resisted had their purpose negated, as the Allies had already established a solid beachhead. The Allied focus immediately shifted from beach conquest to logistics, and here German rigidity failed again. The crucial target was the port of Cherbourg in the north of the Cotentin Peninsula. Cherbourg's importance. The deep-water port of Cherbourg was vital for unloading the colossal volume of supplies and reinforcements, men, tanks, ammunition needed for the Battle of Normandy and the advance into Germany. German destruction. General von Schlieben, commander of the German garrison, obeyed Hitler's order to fight to the last man, but not without first carrying out a meticulous destruction. He demolished the port facilities and anti-ship batteries with explosives, transforming the port into an intentional ruin. The Allied solution, Mulberry Harbors. Anticipating the destruction of Cherbourg, the Allies had already installed the Mulberry Harbors, prefabricated artificial concrete ports towed across the English Channel and assembled at Omaha and Gold beaches. This innovative logistical engineering ensured the constant flow of supplies, circumventing coastal fortifications and German destruction. The fall of Cherbourg on June 26, 1944, was an Allied strategic victory sealed by logistics. The personal fall. Rommel and the July 20 conspiracy. The Desert Fox's disillusionment. Erwin Rommel, severely wounded in an air attack on July 17, 1944,
while driving in France, his vehicle was strafed by an Allied fighter, was removed from command. His disillusionment with Hitler's conduct of the war was total. He recognized Allied air dominance and the fact that the war was lost in the West. Involvement with Operation Valkyrie. Rommel, who was never a Nazi Party member, had become increasingly critical of the Führer and came into contact with members of the German resistance. Although his active participation in the planning of the July 20, 1944 assassination attempt on Hitler is debated by historians, he was against the assassination, preferring Hitler's arrest and trial. He knew of the conspiracy and was slated to take command of West Germany after the coup. The consequence. After the failure of the assassination attempt, the Gestapo discovered Rommel's involvement. Hitler, unwilling to turn his most famous marshal into a public martyr, gave him a secret choice: suicide with poison, in exchange for the guarantee that his family would be spared. October 14, 1944, Rommel committed suicide. He was buried with military honors, and his death was announced as the result of combat wounds. It was the tragic and political end of the man who tried in vain to save the Atlantikwall from its strategic fatality. The end of the slavery machine. The Toth organization, which built the Atlantikwall with slave labor and SS terror, continued to exist until the end of the war, shifting its focus to building internal defenses in Germany. But its great work, the wall, was broken and surrounded.
The fate of the bunkers. The Atlantikwall was a strategic failure, but an engineering success. The bunkers, casements, and fortifications were so robust that they could not be destroyed by Allied forces. Today, thousands of these structures remain along the Atlantic coast. 1. Museums and memorials. Many have been converted into museums, preserving the memory of the conflict and, ironically, the positions that were meant to be permanent, such as the command bunker in Normandy. 2. Geological erosion. Others have been abandoned, and over decades, nature has reclaimed the cement. Today, they can be seen slowly falling into the dunes or swallowed by the advancing sea, silent witnesses to an era of megalomania. The Atlantikwall, conceived as Hitler's invincible shield, proved to be the epitaph of his illusion of grandeur. It failed because Allied intelligence and logistics overcame concrete and tyranny. The wall was the largest fortification project in history, but its ultimate defeat taught an enduring lesson. Modern warfare is not won solely with steel and cement, but with air superiority, unity of command, and above all, with the truth of the landing.